Welcome everybody to Paranormal Into the Night, coast to coast, worldwide on the internet, and live on Facebook, live on YouTube, and yes, of course, if you want to search us in the iTunes Store or Google Play Store, just go ahead and type in Paranormal Into the Night, and you can catch up on all the good past shows. So there you go. What else can you do? You can subscribe to us on YouTube. And also Facebook page. This is the most important. I got a Facebook group called Paranormal Into the Night. You can join that, and you will get everything, anything upcoming, and all that good stuff. And Dave and everybody in the chat room already, welcome, welcome, welcome. We are doing live on Facebook and live on YouTube at the same time. So so it's everywhere, man. I'm going to share it to a couple more pages once we get going here with a great guest. But let's see, did I finish everything? Got to make sure you get all this stuff out. Also check out another group, Watchers Talk. Give them a join. Got a lot of good content coming out right now. The Facebook group, Ancient Aliens Worldwide. Remember, Ancient Aliens Worldwide, because that's the biggest one out there. So check them out. And what else can you do? I got a horror show, a late horror show. It's called The Late Horror Show. Go check that out on YouTube. And so all of that's done. There's also a donate in the description and the bottom. If you want to help me out, get the show going a little bit more, get this all, wound up in a little ball and so I can throw it around. Give a little donate, but that's up to you. Appreciate it. This is fun. Let's get to some Victorian ghost stories. I am going to introduce Simon Entwistle in a second here. Man, he's got Top Hat Tours, where he does ghost tours, all kinds of different tours. It's really very cool. He does it in kind of a classic style, like you would, like back in the... I kind of think the 30s, 40s, somewhere around there. It just, for some reason, it sticks in my head because I love the old-time radio shows. And he kind of gives a theatrical kind of storytelling to it. And also does, in his tours, let's see, it's, what can I say? The Ribble Valley has mystical legends, and Simon Entwistle, dressed in his authentic Victorian costume. Yep, that's how he does his tours. That's why it's so cool. This guy is awesome. We'll be delighted to recount some of his favorites as he accompanies you on his guided walks, exploring the haunted ginnels, cobbled streets, and burial grounds. If I say any of these wrong, then so be it. I think I know them well, but grounds in Clitheroe, Whalley, Blackburn, Accrington, Coleraine, Skipton, York, and Kendal. His area over in the UK. He's straight from the UK. Simon conducts the tour in his own graphical style, complete with resident ghosts and some sound effects, whilst recurring the history of these fascinating towns. He also carries out guided heritage coach tours for groups for all of the above towns and cities. I can go on and on and on. This guy's great. He's doing an awesome thing. Go to his page. It's called Top Hat Tours. And you can get all his information there and all that other good stuff. Simon Entwistle, how are you doing?
Very well, thanks, Dino. Great to talk to you again.
Yes, thank you for coming on again. The first time we talked about Jack the Ripper, and then we kind of spurred off into some other stories. But we do got a list this time of some ones you really wanted to talk about, which is kind of cool. So yeah, thank you very much. And you just got back. I mean, it's like 4 a.m. there, so you just got back from a witch tour that you just did, right?
That's quite correct. I've been on this very, very famous hill called Pendle Hill. And way back in the year 1612, 11 local people were taken from the hill and taken to Lancaster City Castle. And there they were found guilty of witchcraft, of turning milk blue, of murdering cattle, of grave robbery. And they've gone in history as the famous Pendle Witches. And I took a group on the hill tonight. They were a paranormal group, actually. And after I told the story, they then brought up their Ouija boards, they brought up their table tipping devices to try and contact the spirits. And they had some amazing responses, actually, from a gorgeous scent that filled the air to the light meters working. And I've got to say, it's a very, very atmospheric place. It really, really is.
Wow, so they did get some stuff off of the Ouija board and stuff, right?
Very much. You will find that
Huh.
they're a group called Haunted Happenings. They're from Nottingham, England.
Okay.
And they are indeed on Facebook. So you can actually look at their Facebook page and probably see some photographs as well of the event tonight.
Cool. Very good. So yeah, I mean, we can just get. I mean, heck, I'm not going to stand in the way, Simon, because the thing you do the best is tell these stories. And like I said, I love the style that you do. It's kind of theatrical. It reminds me of the good old days when they would do these kind of things. And the UK kind of still does this kind of radio show. I think you do it once a week, don't you, or no?
Yes, that's right. I have a slot on the one of the BBC local radio stations. It's called Simon's Stories,
Oh,
and
love it.
I do them every Friday, just every Friday morning. The stories last about 5 minutes, but it's great fun, really. And what I love about radio, Dino, is you can really paint a picture in people's imagination.
Hmm.
That's the beauty of radio, really.
Oh, for sure. I mean, and if you're a good storyteller like you are, I mean, you could really close your eyes. So everybody, I'll tell you right now, close your eyes or put a candle on, which is always the best thing I like doing. Get some coffee, some popcorn, whatever you want to get. Dim the lights and listen to Simon tell some stories. And we will start right off with, I believe, the Bashel Eves Ghost of 1934.
Yes, now this is a most intriguing story, Dino. First of all, Bashall Eves is a little village, what we call a hamlet, really, consisting of a farm, a post office, a public house, and about 12 little dwellings. Way back on the March the 18th, 1934, a farmer lived in the village. He was called Jim Dawson. He was very, very well liked. He had no known enemies. And that night, March the 18th, 1934, he walked down a country lane in total darkness to a public house called the Eddisford Bridge. According to the landlord, John Barnes, he consumed 6 pints of beer, followed by a glass of gin, and then walked home in total darkness. As he walked back to his farm, down this country lane, a car came from nowhere, and cars were quite rare for that period of time. The car headlamps illuminated a figure down the lane, leaning over a gatepost, looking up the lane towards him. The car went past, and darkness descended to the lane once again. Jim carried on walking. He was 800 yards from the back door of the kitchen on the farm where he lived, when he heard a click from behind the hedgerow and felt a severe blow to his left shoulder and thought, he's thrown a stone at me. He quickened his pace, he got back to the farmhouse, and there his two sisters were in the kitchen. They'd made him a 3-course supper. He sat down at the table. They opened another bottle of beer for him. He consumed a very large meal and then said to his sisters, I think I'll turn in for the night. He made his way upstairs to bed and fell into a deep sleep. Around 4:30 in the morning, he complained of an agonizing pain in his left side and screamed out in agony. His two sisters came rushing into the bedroom. They removed his pajama jacket and rolled him over. They were horrified to find blood on the bed, but also under his arm, an open wound. They called for the doctor. Dr. Cooper arrived from the town of Clitheroe and looked at the wound. Mr. Dawson, I could be wrong, but I think you've been shot. Don't worry, we'll get you to the Royal Infirmary and have an X-ray taken immediately. At the Royal Infirmary in the town of Blackburn, the surgeons took an X-ray, and yes, he had indeed been shot, but not by a conventional bullet, but what looked to be a most unusual bullet, the shape and size of a bird's egg that was deeply embedded in his rib cage. The surgeon said, Mr. Dawson, don't worry, we have located the bullet, and don't worry, we will remove this by anaesthetic. Oh, no, you won't, said Dawson. I don't like operations. I've served through World War I. I've seen men die on operating tables having bullets taken out of them. You're not touching me. The surgeons pleaded, Mr. Dawson, you've been shot. We need to remove the bullet. But he was an adult. They couldn't force him. All they could do was put a bandage over the wound and send him back home again. On arriving back home, the first thing he did was contact his local police force, the West Yorkshire Police Force. They sent two very, very good detectives, Chief Inspector Elliott and Chief Inspector Blake, two very hardened officers. They arrived in this lovely area known as Basher Leaves in the countryside, and they said, oh, this will be a piece of cake. We'll have this situation summed up very, very quickly. They interviewed Jim Dawson. Now, Mr. Dawson, last night you said you saw a figure down the lane illuminated by the car headlamps. How tall was this person? What colour hair? And also, what clothing was he wearing? I can't tell you. He was just too far away. I can't give you a description. So therefore, the West Yorkshire Police did not have a lot to go on with regards to description of the person that shot Jim Dawson. Inspector Elliott got all the local people from that area, all the local farmers from their farms, and asked them to go to the Eddisford Bridge public house with their shotguns, air weapons, and pistols. They left a huge pile of firearms and just left the public house without saying a word. On the third day, Jim's wound turned septic. Against his wishes, against his will, he was rushed back to the Royal Infirmary for an emergency operation where the surgeons did remove this rather ugly shaped bullet, the shape and size of a bird's egg. But poor Jim died that night of septicemia. The West Yorkshire Police then realised they had a murder on their hands. And murder for that period of time was very, very rare. It hit the front page of every newspaper in Great Britain. The West Yorkshire Police could not get a single lead because the locals wouldn't talk to them. But this was murder. They couldn't close the case. They had no option but to hand the whole case over to Scotland Yard. And Scotland Yard sent one of the most famous detectives that period of time, a 77-year-old detective of the name of Sir Robert Churchill. He had retired no fewer than 14 times, but Scotland Yard brought him out of retirement to handle really, really awkward cases. As a young lad in 1888, he'd been in the Metropolitan Police and had very, very nearly caught our famous Whitechapel murderer, known simply as Jack the Ripper, at Mitre Square when he came across a horse trough that was still swirling with freshly washed hands that had claimed the life of Catherine Eddowes. He was a celebrity, and he boasted the national press, "I shall have these peasant farmers behind bars by 3 o'clock this afternoon." He had the local river dragged for the murder weapon. He had the bullet removed from poor Jim's flesh, sent down to the ballistics section at Scotland Yard, where the forensic laboratory teams looked at the bullet and they said, "The bullet is homemade. It will not fit any known caliber rifle in the world. It's been made from cheap agricultural metal. It's been placed on a lathe, rotated at high speed to make it more sharper and more aerodynamic, and fired from some form of strange weapon. I would say possibly a, a air weapon or indeed a crossbow. The murder weapon has never, ever been found." And Sir Robert Churchill went back to Scotland Yard, the laughingstock of Scotland Yard, along with the two West Yorkshire police officers. They also were ridiculed by the national press. The murderer has never ever been brought to justice, but the locals living in that little village called Bashall Leaves, they know exactly who shot Jim Dawson. They know why he was shot. It's the most jealously guarded secret within the little area known as Ribble Valley. The village is known simply as the village that refused to talk. Some 20 years ago, BBC television tried to reenact the murder, to make a drama.
Mm-hmm.
But the locals became very, very hostile. They had some very, very good British actors. Two of them were assaulted by local farmers in the area. They pulled out of the area and they filmed in a village in the West Riding of Yorkshire. When this film was broadcast on national independent television, the people of Bashall Leaves are so annoyed with the scriptwriters because they blame the murder on a young lad called Thomas Simpson. Thomas did exist, but he was the only person that night who had a cast iron alibi. He was actually in one of the local hotels in Clitheroe called the Swan and Royal Hotel. He was so inebriated due to heavy drinking that he spent the night in the snug bar, sleeping under one of the tables, and didn't leave until 11 o'clock the following day. The village is known simply as the village that refused to talk. Now, what has amazed quite a few people is that Jim's ghost has been seen down that very lane. He was seen quite recently by a British postal worker who was delivering post on, would you believe, Christmas Eve 2011. He was driving his postal van at 6:30 in the morning in total darkness towards the farm where Jim used to live. As the postal driver drove down the lane, very near the gate where Jim had been shot all those years ago, a figure came from nowhere and went straight for the engine block, through the dashboard, through him, and out of the back of the vehicle. The postal worker was quite shocked and nearly crashed the vehicle. When he got back to the sorting office, he told everyone, and nearly everyone laughed at him, apart from two elderly postal officers who said, "Don't worry, lad, you've seen the ghost of Jim Dawson. We have also seen him." It's almost as if the ghost of Jim wants to tell the police or tell someone who actually shot him all those years ago. We may never, ever find out. The village is known simply as the village that refused to talk.
Wow. What a title, too, The Village That Refused to Talk. Oh, my God. And I hate to keep giving you so much praise, Simon. I mean, but I cannot emphasize enough how much I love this. I mean, I am an old soul to begin with, okay? So my period of time is that 30s, 40s type of thing, you know? And this just takes me right back. And I just...
It is, yeah. It's the most amazing story. Again, if listeners would like to go to Google search, just put in the Bashall Eaves murder, and you'll see all the Scotland Yard detectives. You'll see the team that tried to track him down. Of course, in those days, we had what's called the death penalty. If you murdered anyone, you would indeed be executed. You'd be hung by execution.
Oh, yeah.
And in the 1960s, of course, in Britain, the death penalty was actually absolved. But in those days, of course, murder was quite rare in Great Britain. because of the death penalty.
Wow. And all of your stories, they're true stories, right? I mean, you're
Very,
reacting.
very true. I find, I do cover a lot of ghost walks, of course. I
Mhm.
find the best way to conduct any tour is not to read about people's experiences, but go and meet them, talk to them, and get their story.
Yes.
And that way you get a really, really good story, of course.
Oh yeah, for sure. And the way you do it, I don't know if I've ever heard of anybody else doing quite what you do. I mean, there could be some more people over there, doing it the way you do. I'm not sure, but hey, what you do is great. Keep doing it. It's awesome, and you can tell you enjoy what you do. That's for sure.
I really do, Dino. And last year I went to the city of Nottingham, and beautiful city, Nottingham,
Hmm.
and I was invited to what's called the Galleries of Justice. It's like a theatre. And what was so nice, uh, being a tour guide, a lot of my work is done outside, of course.
Hmm.
But when you're in a theatre, you can walk the boards in the theatre, and you've got a big captive audience. And it's great to actually relay the stories as you're walking on the stage, and bringing the story to life, and not worry about rain or wind or
Yes.
sleet or snow. It's great fun, and not just ghost stories, but stories about anything really.
Oh yeah, yeah, for real. I mean, you were talking about, you do your weekly thing for it's like a 5 minute segment, but I've often thought to going back if I was a little bit younger and had a little bit more time. It's never too late, but I would love for there to be old time radio shows now. You don't get that really on the AM stations or the local broadcasts, really, at least in the USA that I know of. It's everybody going back to the old stuff. I would love to hear something new.
Yeah, yeah.
More people listen to the radio, I think, or the internet, whatever. But radio in particular, more than people really realize, and it's just an awesome thing and a great thing to just put the headphones in, sit back, relax, and enjoy. But
It's fantastic. I mean, I'm sure there's many people listening who have probably done some do-it-yourself at home, painting at home,
mm-hmm.
painting walls, working in their houses. And if you got the radio on and there's a radio play,
Yep.
that takes you to a different world. It takes you to a different world. And of course, you don't need any props. The only props you need really are your ears
Mm-hmm.
and, of course, your imagination. And I remember many, many years ago, the great H.G. Wells, The War of the Worlds on the radio.
Yes.
And that was brought to life just by pure imagination, really. And yet there'd be three or four people in a studio with a microphone and a script, and they'd bring it to life, really.
Oh yeah, amazing. Okay, enough praising you here, there, Simon. Let's move on to
Far
the.
too kind, Dino. Far too kind. Yeah.
Not really. It is true. But anyways, number two. Let's go to the Levens Hall renovation ghost, 1923.
Right. Levens Hall is a beautiful Tudor building, built around the 1540 period. It's a gorgeous hall. Again, if you want to go into Google search, put Levens Hall, you'll see it. Way back in the year 1923, it was in danger of falling down. Of course, it's what we call a Grade 1 listed building, a national treasure. So, therefore, it's protected by law. In 1923, uh, this building was in danger of falling down, but was saved by what's called the Levenshall Preservation Society. And they raised enough money to not only save the building, but to bring in some highly professional people that could repair it.
Mhm.
One such person was called Mr. Michael Palin, and he had worked on some of England's most beautiful halls. He knew all about medieval buildings. He arrived at the hall on a beautiful June day in 1923. He brought with him four apprentices, and he gave each apprentice a different part of the hall. He then chose the main entrance himself. He got a ladder, he climbed up the ladder, and with a hammer and chisel, he chiseled away at the old and eroded stone just beneath a window. As he pushed the stone off, it fell to the earth at great speed, As he looked down, he was horrified to see a little boy with curly black hair standing at the bottom of the ladder, and Palin shouted, "Look out, lad, look out!" The little boy just stood there. The stone came down and grazed his nose and landed right in front of his toes. Palin came down the ladder. To this boy, a piece of his mind. The lad could have been killed, but the role was completely reversed. The little boy shouted, "You shouldn't be here! Mr. Braddow won't like it! You shouldn't be here!" "Well, look, lad, I've got a right to be here," said Palin. "You stand back. You could have been badly injured. I've been told I've got to repair this building. You stand back." Palin turned round and climbed back up the ladder. As he looked around, the little boy just disappeared. "That's strange," he thought. "He must be a quick runner." Well, for the next 5 months, Michael and his apprentices worked very, very hard, bringing in new timber, new tiles, new glass, and the hall was beginning to look a bit like its former 1538 self once again. They arrived for another hard day's work on a bitterly cold December day, 3 days before Christmas Day 1923. The blue skies disappeared and were replaced by huge clouds full of snow. A wind whipped up, which turned into a blizzard, and heavy, heavy snow came down from the heavens. It was snowing so heavily that Michael told his 4 apprentices, "I'm sorry, boys. Tonight we won't get home. We'll have to spend the night here. All the roads will be clogged with snow." The 4 apprentices complained bitterly. They wanted to get home, but they realised that outside was a blizzard they'd never seen before. Heavy, heavy snow came tumbling down from the skies. Michael said, "Right, boys, we've got exactly 2 hours of daylight left. Let's go into the forest, get lots of firewood, and keep the fire going all night to keep us warm." By 4:30 in the afternoon, it was completely dark. In those days, no mobile telephones, no laptops, no computers, no radio, no television. The only thing they had would be a good night's sleep to enjoy, really. So the 4 boys, they got their bedrolls and rolled them out in front of the roaring fire in the main hall. Michael got his bedroll, rolled it out next to them, and being a gentleman that believed in the good Lord, he had a silent prayer to the good Lord. He then glanced to his right, and in the corner of the main hall, he saw a golden glowing light. And out of that golden glowing light suddenly stepped a very beautiful young lady in Tudor dress. She very elegantly made her way past Palin, in between the sleeping apprentices, and knelt down in front of the glowing fire and clasped her hands together in deep prayer. She prayed that her husband would survive the war. She then disappeared, but left a crackle in the air and a sweet, sweet scent. Palin's heart accelerated in his chest. His mouth went dry. He nervously looked to the right and saw another golden glowing light emerge from the corner of the hall. And out of that golden glowing light stepped a 1642 British Army Cavalier officer from the English Civil War period. He had a goatee beard, he had feathers in his cap, bandoliers across his chest, riding boots, and a sword by his side. He made his way to the side of the fireplace, put his hand on the fireplace, and uttered the words, "I hope I survive the war." He too disappeared. By now, Palin is severely traumatized. He's seen something very, very paranormal. He nervously glanced to the right for the 3rd time and sees a much smaller glowing light. And out of that glowing light suddenly stepped the little boy with the curly black hair that had nearly been hit by the stone in June of that year when Palin took it off from the top of the ladders. The little boy ran straight past Palin and right through the sleeping apprentices. Well, as you can imagine, Palin did not sleep very well that night, but quite surprisingly, when the 4 boys woke up that morning, he didn't tell them what had happened. And when he got back home to his wife and family, he didn't tell them what happened. But some 20 years later, as a very elderly gentleman, he was walking past Levens Hall, as he had done on many occasions, just to admire his handiwork, and he saw a military vehicle belonging to the Royal Air Force, the RAF, parked outside the main entrance. He thought, Royal Air Force, what are they doing there? He walked across the lawns and made his way into the main hall, and he saw two Royal Air Force personnel admiring the fireplace where he'd slept all those years ago. One was a female in Royal Air Force uniform, the other was a male. As the door clicked, they turned round, and Palin entered the room. He made eye contact with the young lady in the RAF uniform and just stared at her. Quite naturally, she felt very, very embarrassed. Can I help you? May I help you? She said. Her companion, the officer, then intervened. Can we help you, please? Palin recognised the young girl in the RAF uniform to be the same beautiful young girl he'd seen walk out of the golden glowing light in the Tudor dress in 1923. And he told her. She burst into tears. Mr. Palin, I don't disbelieve a word you've told me. I don't disbelieve a word you've told me. But I'm from the city of Leicester. I've never been to Westmoreland in my life before. But as we drove past in the staff car, I shouted, stop, stop, stop. I know this place. I've been here before. And you, Mr. Palin, have just answered my anxieties. And what a great story that is, Dino.
Oh, wow. Yeah, well, you better believe it. Very paranormal into the night. Hey, and you know what? I would suggest anybody who is loving this and interested, go check out Simon Entwistle's page or go look at Top Hat Tours, because start following this guy because I mean it's mostly tours and stuff like that, but I guarantee you I'll have him on again and you'll hear him. So yeah, this is just amazing, Simon. Let's move on to the next one, the disappearance.
Sure.
Oh wait, do you have some tea or something to sip on? Are you fine?
Yes, I've got a cup of tea by my side.
Okay.
Also, Dino, I'd just like to mention I do have a book which can be bought on Amazon or Kindle, and it's called Ghostly Tales of the Unexpected. And you can buy this on Amazon or indeed Kindle under Simon Entwistle, Ghostly Tales of the Unexpected.
There you go. Yeah, and I will post that in all my groups, so
thank you.
and in the descriptions and everything else. So I will do that. Yep, Simon Entwistle. You can also look up Simon Entwistle on Amazon too. It'll come right up. So very cool. Yeah, and if anybody out there's listening and they love what he's doing, contact him. Let's see. The disappearance of Emily Holland, 1875.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
There we go.
A very, very true story and a very, very touching story. We're going to make our way now into the town of Blackburn. I'm sure many of you have heard the album by the Beatles called Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. There's a very, very famous slot called A Day in the Life, and they mention 4,000 holes in Blackburn, Lancashire. Well, this is the town of Blackburn, and it was a textile town. Everyone who lived in the town of Blackburn would work in textiles in the 1800s. This is the story of a young girl called Emily Holland. Emily is 9 years old. She's walking home from school with her two brothers on the 25th of October, 1875. As she makes her way past a public house called the Wheat Sheaf, she suddenly just disappears. Her two brothers carry on walking and turn round. Where's Emily? That's strange, she must have run up ahead of us. When they got home, Emily wasn't there, and Emily's mother and father were very, very concerned. They rushed down into the town of Blackburn and went straight to the police station and told the police, our daughter, she's not come home. She's just disappeared. Don't worry, said the police. Inspector Potts, Inspector Eastwood, and Detective Livesey started to organise search patrols of the whole town of Blackburn. A day passed, another day passed, and another 5 days passed, and Emily wasn't to be found anywhere. You can only imagine her mother and father must have been very, very distraught and terribly concerned. On the 8th day, a gentleman called Mr. Peter Fairclough took his dog for a walk in the local park. The dog came out of the park with some newspaper in its mouth, saturated in blood. Fairclough grabbed the newspaper and said, "Get that out your mouth," and tugged the newspaper. As he tugged the newspaper from the dog's mouth, out came a child's hand. Fairclough was deeply upset by this, and it wasn't long before the police arrived, Inspector Eastwood, Inspector Potts, and Detective Livesey. It was blatantly obvious that the limb belonged to a child, and they were 99.5% convinced that the limb belonged to Emily Holland. An hour later, a Mrs. White was walking to work, and she tripped over some newspapers in the gutter. And she turned round and picked up the newspaper, which was quite heavy, again, saturated in blood. As she opened the newspaper, she was horrified to find the torso of a child. She was violently sick, and of course the police arrived, and Eastwood and Potts took the newspaper with the organs back to the police station and had a look inside the newspaper. Inside the paper that had been found that morning was lots of human hair belonging to different human beings. And Eastwood said, "I've got it. Whoever committed this despicable crime on this young girl committed it in a barber's shop. I believe the murderer is a barber." Now, in the town of Blackburn, a population of some 250,000 people, there were 25 individual barber shops. Wow. They checked every single one, including one run by a gentleman called Mr. William Fish. William Fish was 25 years old. He had a wife and 2 daughters and was considered to be quite a civilized sort of person. As Eastwood, Potts and Livesey made their way into his shop, his barber's shop, they saw a large pile of local newspapers, the Blackburn Herald. Eastwood had his pen and pad with him, and he had made a note of all the numbers on the newspapers and dates on the newspapers used to wrap the poor girl's organs in, and noticed that that paper was not on the pile of newspapers inside the barber's shop at William Fish's. His words were, "Mr. Fish, where's last week's Blackburn Herald? Oh, I used it this morning, sir, to light the fire." And they accepted the story. A week passed with no arrests. Another week passed with no arrests. And outside the police station in Blackburn, the billboards from the local newspapers read as follows: "Blackburn police incompetent, nowhere nearer to catching maniac." And this really upset them, but they couldn't get a single lead. The Home Office in London put up £100 to anyone who could find the murderer. Also, a local textile mill owner in Blackburn put up £100. So £200 to anyone who could find the murderer. £200 in the year 1875 would be the equivalent of, probably shall I say, £800,000 nowadays. Oh. Who should pick up the gauntlet but a 13-year-old boy from the town of Preston, not too far from Blackburn. He was called Peter Levine, and Peter wrote a letter to Blackburn Police. "Sir, I have a dog, sir. He's called Morgan. He's a Collie Lurcher cross. He has a marvellous smell. He's marvellous at smelling scents. He will find your murderer." Well, Eastwood, Potts and Livesey had a good laugh, but they looked outside the police station that day, and the billboards were getting very, very, very strong. "Blackburn police incompetent. Blackburn police no good at their jobs. Not worth the ratepayers' money. They should be sacked." They thought, well, we tried everything. Let's meet young Peter. They met Peter with his father at the railway station in Blackburn, and Peter had this dog called Morgan. And Morgan was a very, very thin dog that was shivering with the cold. Peter said, "Sir, my dog just needs to get a scent from your newspapers and he will find your murderer." Well, we tried everything else, so they took the dog to the mortuary. They brought out the remains of poor Emily, and they brought out the newspaper that had been used to wrap her organs in. The dog, Morgan, started barking hysterically, and Peter said, "Sir, he's got a scent, sir." they opened the door of the mortuary, and the dog ran straight into the town centre of Blackburn, ran straight up Darwin Street, up King Street, and straight to William Fish's barber's shop. Behind the glass in the main door was indeed Fish. He was horrified to see the three police officers and this dog and young Peter outside his barber's shop. The dog was scratching at the door. Fish opened the door, the dog went through his legs and straight to the front room, followed by Eastwood, Potts and Livesey. And young Peter said, "Sir, my dog knows there's something up the chimney where the fireplace is, sir." "Right, arrest Fish immediately," shouted Eastwood. And Eastwood handcuffed him and pressed Fish against the wall, whilst Detective Potts knelt down and reached up behind the chimney breast and found some more newspaper. He took the newspaper out, opened it, and found the remains of poor Emily Holland's dress. Fish was given a good hiding by the police officers. In those days, the police were allowed to be a bit more aggressive than they are nowadays. He was then sent down to Kirkdale in Liverpool and put on trial. He said on the day of the murder, he'd been drinking very, very heavily. As young Emily came past the Wheatsheaf public house, for some inexplicable reason, he grabbed this 9-year-old girl. He committed a terrible, terrible offence on her. Horrified by what he'd done, he then strangled the poor girl and took her body back to the barber's shop to try and dissect her to get rid of various body parts. But as you've been told by the story, he wasn't very, very good at that. He was then executed in the city of Liverpool, but our story is just beginning. The actual barber's shop is now an estate agent's in the 21st century, and the staff tell me when they go to work on a Monday morning, it doesn't happen every time, but they find gobbledygook on quite a few of their computers, as if someone has been playing with the keyboards. Could that be the ghost of poor Emily Holland, whose only crime in life was to be at the wrong place at the wrong time? What I can tell you about William Fish is he became the very, very first person from the county of Lancashire to become a Madame Tussauds waxwork dummy from 1875 to 1921. He was known simply as the Blackburn Butcher. A very sad but true story, Dino.
Wow. Unbelievable. That gobbledygook, is it, was it translucent? Was it green slime?
Well, it was like words on the keyboard that had been picked up by the computer. And when the staff would sit down, they'd turn the computer on and say, "Who's been on the computer at night time?" This gobbledygook is like, shall we say, lots of different words that don't mean anything really, as if you'd been playing on the keyboard and left lots of different words there really.
I hear you. I've been watching a lot of BBC Big Brother and stuff like that. I'm a big fan of the UK TV series and stuff. And yeah, there's a lot of different terms and words that you would never hear over here in the US that they say, and that's commonplace over there. But over here, you'd be like, "What? What does that mean? What are they talking about?" But so yeah, it's very interesting. You did talk about a barber in this story. Do you ever, in any of your stories or anything, talk about Sweeney Todd?
Oh, he was a famous character, very, very famous character. Of course, a London character, really. City of London does bring up some great stories, but Sweeney Todd, of course, I wasn't too happy with the way he used the bodies to make pies and things.
No.
He did, in fact, use human flesh to make pies. I suppose if it's cooked properly, it might be okay, but I wouldn't fancy it myself, Dino, really.
Okay, no, for sure. But I do love the movie. But I agree with you totally.
Dino, the last time I talked to you, you mentioned the series Taboo. I thought that was absolutely excellent.
Yeah.
Brilliant for a BBC TV show called Taboo. And has that been shown in the USA yet?
Yeah, I do believe it's on TV. Boy,
Huddleston, a great actor, marvelous actor.
Yeah, I couldn't tell you exactly what channel it's on right now, but yeah, people can find it out there. It's for sure, yeah. Okay, yeah, let's move on to because I'd like to hear this one. The Ghosts of Clitheroe Castle, 1648.
Right. Well, in Clitheroe, this is a town I live in. In fact, as I talked to you, it's just getting light, by the way, now, Dina. What a great time to be out.
There you
It's just getting
go.
light. Just gone quarter to 5 in the morning here, but just getting light, actually. And I can see Clitheroe Castle from where I'm talking to you right now.
Oh, excellent. Good.
It's basically an 800-year-old castle. Its most exciting period has to be the English Civil War of 1642 to 1651. Now, the English Civil War started because at that period of time we had King Charles I on the throne of England, and in those days the king, the royal family, would make up all the rules, all the regulations, and he would actually run the country. Now, there was a gentleman called Oliver Cromwell, and he formed what we now call modern democracy in the United Kingdom. He was what we call a parliamentarian. And he said to the king, he said, "Sir, I will challenge you for the right to rule Great Britain by democracy, by the people, not by the royal family." And the king said, "I shall take you on." The English Civil War lasted for 10 very, very long years. The country was split. Those people who wished to fight for the king were known as royalists, and those people who should fight for parliament were known as parliamentarians. The town of Clitheroe was in fact garrisoned by a regiment of royalists, but a lot of them were foreign mercenaries, German and Dutch soldiers, and they were paid for by the king's shilling. And when their wages ran out, they had a very nasty habit of stealing children from their parents for ransom money. If their parents did not pay any ransom money, the children were cruelly murdered. And we know from looking at the town's records this actually happening. The garrison commander was called Captain Cuthbert, a most ruthless man who took anything he wanted: food, clothing, people, cattle, anything. The people of the town of Clitheroe, they hoped and prayed that one day Oliver Cromwell and his parliamentarian government troops would arrive to liberate the town. And they did do on the 18th of August, 1648. They brought with them this huge army of some 48,000 men. And with the army came a huge cannon, a breaching cannon called Humpty Dumpty. Humpty Dumpty now is still with us, but is actually in Bermuda. It's on display in Bermuda. It was a huge cannon designed for breaching castle walls. The actual cannonball was a huge thing. So you'd pack it with gunpowder behind it and then fire the projectile at a wall and it would punch a hole through it. Humpty Dumpty was brought up and they used it on Clitheroe Castle. The hole is still there to this very day. The white flag was raised and the royalist army surrendered at the castle. A crude POW camp was built that night, and in the early hours of the morning, 3 royalist officers escaped, but their uniforms quickly gave them away, and on the orders of General Ashton, they were brought back to Clitheroe Castle for execution by beheading. This execution would take place in front of their fellow POWs to deter any more escapes from the POW camp. Each man had his hands tied behind his back. He had to kneel down and, if they were very, very lucky, have their heads severed from their spinal cords with one swish of the axe. The 3 men brought forward were Captain Rockcliffe, Lieutenant Casewell, and Lieutenant Aitken. In the case of Lieutenant Casewell, it took 3 attempts to actually sever his head from his spinal cord. He must have died in absolute agony. Before each man lost his life, he shouted the words, "God save the King!" because the Lord King Charles I, even in their last second of life. We now pick at this story many, many centuries later on a bitterly cold April morning in 1982, when a police car made its way up to the castle in the early hours of the morning for a smoke break. It just shows how busy the police were. They were sitting in their squad car, enjoying a cigarette, They kept the engine running to keep them warm. And above the sound of the engine, they heard the words, "God save the king!" "That's strange," said the sergeant. "It's just gone 2:30 in the morning, a Tuesday morning. Who in the right mind will be up there at that time of morning? Let's get our torches and we'll go and investigate." They got their torches from the squad car and made their way up the steps and into the castle. They shone their torches on the wall, and all of a sudden, one officer screamed in terror. The other two officers turned round in time to see a royalist soldier walk straight out of the limestone wall and straight for their colleague. Now, these men had seen some very, very unpleasant sights as police officers, but not one of them had seen anything as paranormal as this. They rushed down the steps at great speed, jumped into the squad car, and reversed at great speed, hitting a horse trough in the grounds of the castle, causing extensive damage to the squad car. They drove back to the police station, where their colleagues laughed hysterically at their story. However, one man didn't. He was the desk sergeant, the duty sergeant. His words were as follows: "Don't worry, lads. I believe you. I've been a bobby in Clitheroe for 25 years, and I too have seen the ghosts of Clitheroe Castle, Aitken, Casewell, and Rockcliffe."
Wow. Unbelievable. What a story. Jeez.
I actually met those. I met those three officers, and they've all now retired, of course.
Okay.
And you can always tell, Dino, when someone is pulling your leg. But these guys were very, very honest and very, very, very shaken by what they'd seen.
Yeah.
But it is a very true story, but a very, very touching one as well, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm
sure. Ghost hunters that go up to the castle to try and conjure up the spirits of these people. It does happen sometimes.
Ah, interesting. Yeah, I mean, I would guess you doing it as long as you have been. You've got to know when people are telling the truth. I mean, it's most of the time you can tell, unless you're a very good actor. But yeah, I did just post, anybody listening, I did just post a link in Paranormal Into the Night Facebook group and the page for Simon Entwistle's book, Ghostly Tales of the Unexpected. And his name is Simon Entwistle. Last name you spell it Entwistle. So there you go. And yeah, did I ever ask you how you actually got into this?
Well, I've always had a fascination with ghost stories. Let's be honest, it is a very, very fascinating subject, really, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
I do get invited to schools and colleges to give talks. And when I go to, shall I say, a lot of the junior schools, the teacher will say, "Simon, I wish I could get the same attention when I'm teaching mathematics and English and geography. But a good ghost story will always catch the imagination of everyone. You're on a winner with a ghost story every time."
Oh yeah. Did you actually go to get an education in this and history and stuff, and then it just slowly evolved into this, or did you just go head into it?
Well, I suppose really my dad, he was a marvellous chap. I can't remember if I told you this story, but if not, do remind me. My dad was the sort of man that would never lie about anything. He was a very, very honest man. And he told me probably the finest ghost story I've ever heard.
Yeah.
And it's a story that really does fascinate me. We're going to turn the clock back now to 1963. I was just a young lad, some 7, 8 years old at the time, I think. And my father bought a beautiful old Victorian house in what's called the English Lake District, a very beautiful part of Great Britain. I remember as a young boy getting into the removal vehicle with my sister and elder brother, my mum and dad, and all our worldly goods in the removal vehicle. We drove some 200 miles, quite a long distance, to this new house, and my dad was very, very concerned about myself, my brother and sister. And the first thing he did on getting to the new house was to put the beds up. And because it'd been such a long journey, myself, my brother and sister, we fell into a deep sleep straight away. Because the house was out in the country, the last job that needed to be done was to put any curtains up, and there were no neighbours anyway, really.
Mm-hmm.
And my dad had no idea, but that night he was going to experience something very, very paranormal. He climbed into bed with my mum and turned over and noticed there was bright, bright moonlight illuminating the bedroom because there was no curtains.
Mm-hmm.
It was very, very strong moonlight. He then heard the sound of tiny footsteps. The door of the bedroom slowly, slowly creaked open, and in came a liver and white spaniel dog, what we call a cocker spaniel dog. The dog went to the corner of the room and stood there, and my father thought, oh no, I must have left the door open downstairs. He got out of bed to grab the dog by the collar and take it downstairs and put it outside. As he attempted to touch the dog, his hand went straight through it. He made a second attempt, and his hand went straight for the dog. The dog then seemed to turn as if its name was being called and looked towards the bedroom window. My father glanced back at the dog, and it just disappeared. At the same time, my mother, who'd been in a very, very deep sleep, woke up with a jolt. And she said, oh, I just had this amazing dream. It was so clear. I dreamt there's a man outside the house in Victorian clothing with a dog lead in his hand, looking up at the window, pointing up at our bedroom window. My father then just told her what he'd seen, and they put two and two together. My father never told me that story until I was about 15 years old, because it certainly shocked him, and he didn't want to scare me, my brother, or sister. But something really, really paranormal did happen to me only 2 years ago.
Uh-huh.
And I swear to you, this is quite true, Dino. I can understand if you don't believe it, because it is quite bizarre, really. I mentioned that I go to schools and give talks. I also have what's called a PowerPoint show, where I take my laptop and with an HDMI cable, I put that into a projector and put pictures on the wall and talk about the stories. As a result, I have been invited to the odd cruise liners. Cruise liners have guest speakers, etc. And last year I was invited, very, very kindly invited, by one of the British cruise companies to give a talk on Jack the Ripper, on the Pendle Witches, the Battle of Arnhem, and various ghost stories, etc. But I had to audition first of all, and
Really?
I had to audition, yeah.
Oh, okay.
In other words, to show that I could use the equipment.
Okay.
And I was given a sat-nav code for a house in that region. And lo and behold, I swear to you, as the good Lord is my witness, it was the same house that my dad saw the ghost in, and the same house which I used to live. Now, the chances of that happening are millions to one against. But as I drove up the drive, I thought, wow, it's the old house I used to live in. And I went to that front room with my projectional equipment and met a lady called Maureen, who was auditioning for, and I told her, and she said, I find that very, very hard to take in, Simon. But I swear to you, it is honestly very, very true. It's almost as if that house wanted me back again. And one thing that did happen, of course, that day is I'm very, very proud to say I passed the audition.
Very good. Well, yeah, I was gonna say, even if you didn't get the equipment down, just listening to you, you go, oh, "We'll work with you. We'll get it down. We'll fix it." So, yeah, wow, very interesting. You did tell that on the last the show, but it's good good for the new listeners to hear it again because, I mean, it just goes to show what why you're drawn to this. I mean,
so when my dad told me, I was absolutely fascinated, and still am, really.
Oh, and for that
the story,
happen, yeah.
The story does intrigue me, and I suppose really, my dad had no idea at the time, but he sowed a seed. He sowed a seed that day, really.
Yeah, wow, and for it to happen after he passed away, and
Incredible, absolutely incredible. Yeah.
unbelievable. Yeah. Let's see. The Canadian Ghost of Bottle Wyden Castle, 1919. Did I say that right?
Yes, yeah. Bodlewithen is
Bottle Wyden.
a
Okay.
Welsh castle. This is a very tragic story. It is a very tragic story, really.
Mm.
And we go way back to the year 1918. Of course, World War One has just finished. Now, in the British Commonwealth, of course, you have Australians, New Zealanders,
Hmm.
and Canadians. And in World War One, the Canadians fought extremely well. They were very, very good soldiers, very, very tough lads. In fact, the Germans called them stormtroopers. They were that good. The British government realised they were also very, very good. And this huge Canadian battalion came back from France and were billeted at Bodlewithen Castle in North Wales. They were told, gentlemen, there'll be a boat coming in for you very, very soon to take you back to Canada. Uh, Bodlewithen Castle is not too far from the city of Liverpool. Well, the Canadian soldiers arrived and they were billeted at the castle, and they kept saying, we need to get home. We need to get back to our families. We need to get back home. And they were told, don't worry, the ship will be in next week. The ship never arrived because the
Hmm.
British government were actually very, very seriously thinking about invading Russia. Of course, at that time, Great Britain was indeed quite a superpower, really, quite a superpower. And the new Soviet Union was causing lots of problems. And Britain looked at them as a bit of a threat, really. And they were seriously thinking of invading what would have been the Ukraine and then freeing parts of Russia from from communism, if you will.
Hmm.
Of course, they needed crack troops, and these Canadian boys were very, very good soldiers. However, they wanted to go back home again, and they couldn't work out why they were being kept. Uh, on the night of the 28th of September, 1918, rioting took place at Bodlewithen Castle. And the Canadian soldiers said, we've had enough of this, we're going home, whether you like it or not. And the guards opened fire on them, killing 11 of the Canadian soldiers. As it happens, their commanding officer was brought into the equation, and permission was then given for the battalion, the Canadian battalion, to actually go home. The idea of invading Russia had been cancelled. However, on the graves of these Canadian soldiers who'd been shot by the British military were the words, died of influenza. It was a cover up because it would have caused an awful lot of grief back in Canada
Hmm.
had these Canadian boys had the real story got out.
Yeah.
Because basically, they all they wanted to do was just go home again. That was their only crime, really. But Bodlewithen Castle is now a hotel. It's a very busy hotel.
Wow.
But the ghosts of these Canadian soldiers have been seen and heard in the castle. And also, there was a case in the national press a few years ago of a couple in one of the rooms there who could hear someone talking. And it was a very strong North American accent with the words, why can't I just go home? Why can't I just go home now?
Hmm.
And it was recorded. It was recorded.
Ah, EVP. Okay. Hmm. Yeah, very interesting. And I mean, with war comes a lot of that kind of tragic stuff, and covering it up too, because people don't want a lot of those evil deeds to get out. So,
No, no, and it was an evil deed, really. I mean, these poor
yeah.
lads, they'd fought so hard.
Hmm.
The Canadian losses in World War One were absolutely tragic.
Hmm.
I've been to Belgium, I've been to France, and I've been to look at these huge cemeteries in northern France. And there's a place called the Menin Gate and a place called Ypres,
Hmm.
where on the Menin Gate it's a huge, huge memorial, and it's to those poor lads that don't have a grave.
Okay.
So many people actually lost their lives in World War One in trench warfare.
Yep.
Sometimes their bodies were just completely disintegrated, and in some cases they'd actually drown in the mud. And so the
Hmm.
names of all those names all those boys that lost their lives under such sad circumstances are on the Menin Gate, and there's an awful lot of Canadian boys and Australians and New Zealanders, and of course British as well.
Yeah, the early wars were just, oh my God, so barbaric. And yeah, like you.
First War was
Oh,
absolutely tragic.
definitely, yeah.
But of course, the Americans came into the war and made a huge difference.
Yeah,
A huge difference. In fact, I think it's fair to say that without American help, World War One would have gone on and on and on. And
yep,
those guys actually settled it very well, really.
for sure. Well, let's go to Punch Bowl Inn, Ned King, 1739.
Well, this is a great story, a fabulous
Oh,
story.
this one is.
Uh, it's a brilliant story.
They all are, Simon.
It's a very, very touching story, this one, really. We'll go back to that period of time. Now, the
Okay.
Punch Bowl Inn is a beautiful public house. It was built around 1721, would you believe?
Wow.
And it's still open to this very, very day. Now, England is a bit like America in many ways. We have what's called counties. And in the south of England is a county called Essex.
Mm-hmm.
And living in Essex in the 1730s was a gentleman called Ned King. And Ned King was a highwayman. He would actually hold up coaches and net a small fortune. Now, there was a huge reward on his head. So he thought he'd come up north to Yorkshire, a northern county, a long, long way from Essex where no one would know him. And he arrived at the Punch Bowl Inn. There he met the landlord, John Briscoe, and got a job as a groomsman. When the coaches came in, his job would be to, shall we say, groom the horses, feed them and water them, etc. And also he'd have a look inside the inn to see how many women there were, how many men there were, and what sort of jewellery the ladies wore, etc., and how much money the gentleman had. He would then put a mask on and gallop at great speed in his horse to a place called the Mitten Crossroads. And there he would shout those famous words, "Stand and deliver." He held up no fewer than 14 coaches from 1739 to 1741, netting a small fortune. Of course, in those days, we didn't have any police, but what we did have were the redcoats. And a platoon of redcoats arrived in the village of Worley. And the lieutenant in charge of the platoon said, "Right, lads, I want 6 of my best marksmen inside the coach. Take off your red tunics and put black cloaks on and pretend to be civilians." They made their way to the Mitten Crossroads. There, King was waiting for them, and he shouted his words, "Stand and deliver." Before the word deliver left his mouth, he heard the words, "Volley fire!" And the army volley fired from the side of the coach, and King received a musket ball in his chest. He was slowly bleeding to death, but got back on his horse and galloped back to the Punch Bowl. He rushed upstairs and told Briscoe, "I've got the army on my tail." They had a contingency plan. That contingency plan was to have loaded muskets and pistols upstairs, and they kept the redcoats off for 3 long hours, killing 3 redcoats. At the same time, King was slowly bleeding to death due to the musket ball in his chest. He said to Briscoe, "You make a run for it. I'll hold them off." Briscoe climbed down the drain pipe at the back of the Punch Bowl and ran across the open fields. The army could see him. They volley fired, and he was shot on the spot. In the meantime, poor Ned King is slowly dying upstairs. The lieutenant in charge of the platoon rushed upstairs and grabbed him by the shirt collar and shouted, "Right, lad, it was my job to take you back to Preston for trial for highway robbery. You shot 3 of my best men. I shall now mete out my own justice by hanging you on the spot." He was dragged by the shirt collar down the stairs, out in front of the inn, where there was a large oak tree. The lieutenant threw a rope over the oak tree, made a noose for King, put it round his head, and although King was nearly dead from blood loss, he was hoisted from his feet. When his feet stopped kicking, they released the pressure, and his body was then lowered to the ground. They buried him in the hedgerow right across from the old Punch Bowl Inn. His ghost has been seen by many, many people, and I'm going to choose just two stories relating to him.
Okay.
In the year 1976, we had a very, very hot summer, a most unusual hot summer in England, with no rain from March to September. Very, very unusual. The sun was very hot that year as well. Because it was so warm and dry, a farmer very, very near the punch bowl complained bitterly that his barn was on fire. He contacted the fire brigade, and a tender was rushed at great speed, a fire engine tender, made its way from Clitheroe to the Mitten Crossroads. When they got there, they thought, this fire is too big, we need some more help. So the nearby town of Blackburn dispatched a fire tender, and the Blackburn fire crews raced at great speed towards the Mitten Crossroads, where King, all those years before, had held up the coaches. The driver shouted, "Oh no, there's a bloke and a horse right in front of us!" And they ran him over. They broke every rule in the fire brigade's training manual on stopping a fire engine on its way to a fire. 5 crew members climbed out of the engine, and the driver reversed backwards, expecting to find a horrible, mangled mass. There was nothing there at all. It was put down simply to a sighting of Ned King, the famous Ribble Valley highwayman. The Punch Bowl to this very, very day has excellent meals, excellent quality beers, and accommodation. But Ned's ghost has been seen on quite a few occasions. He's certainly quite a star in this part of the world.
Wow. How often sighted?
Well, he's been seen in some of the bedrooms there,
Okay.
but also when the landlord has what's called closing times, he closes the bar.
Mm-hmm.
He's come downstairs and found items that have been moved from shelves, and he knows that there's only 2 people in the building, himself and his wife, and also glasses have fallen to the floor by themselves. King, of course, lost his life there all those years ago, and many paranormal investigators believe that somehow his spirit is locked within the building.
Huh. Wonder why he would be locked in the building. I guess there's no way of telling.
No way of telling, Dino.
Right. I mean, what the spirits actually, what happens to them after death. So, one of those little things that we just might not ever know until we pass on, so.
Very true. Very true, Dino.
Okay. How about the mosquito bomber of 1949?
Right. The Mosquito bomber was a Royal Air Force aircraft. It was very, very fast. It had Rolls-Royce engines, and for that period of time was extremely fast. It could take on the German aircraft very, very easily, particularly the Focke-Wulf 190, which claimed so many flying fortresses from the United States 8th Army Air Force. Mm-hmm. But the Mosquito could keep up with it and actually shoot them down.
Yeah.
Way back in 1945, of course, the Royal Air Force and the United States 8th Army Air Force, they were getting new jet fighters, and the jet fighters were replacing the turboprops. But the Royal Air Force did keep one of the Mosquitoes for a weather plane to actually check on the weather, etc. Mm-hmm. One night in 1949, a Royal Air Force officer, the name of John Cadman, took off in an aircraft called the Lightning, the English Electric Lightning aircraft, flew from Germany back to England. As he was flying through an electrical storm, his instruments went a bit wonky, if you will, and he couldn't get his compass to work. He had a limited amount of fuel, but was very, very worried where he was. He didn't know if he was flying back to Germany or flying out to the North Sea or flying towards England. He needed some help, and he got on the radio, but the radio wasn't working due to the electrical storm that had damaged his instruments. He looked up at the rear view mirror above the cockpit and saw this 1940s Mosquito right behind him. And the Mosquito waggled its wings and told him to more or less follow him. And so he slowed the jet fighter down to the same speed as the Mosquito and followed the Mosquito. All of a sudden, through the cloud and the the moonlight, he could make out England, and he could make out an aerodrome. He landed at the aerodrome and glanced up, but there was no sign of the mosquito whatsoever. He then went to the control tower and said he was ever so grateful to the pilot of the mosquito that shepherded him all the way back across the English Channel. And the control tower said, well, it wasn't one of ours. In fact, we don't know who it could have been. They checked all the RAF aerodromes that night, and the mosquito they've been talking about had been taken out of service some 3 years before that. So they believe the mosquito was none other than a ghost aeroplane. There have been some stories of this mosquito being seen on a few other occasions as well. How or why, we don't know, but perhaps the spirit world has another way of conjuring up different events and indeed different things, really.
Yeah, I was going to say, I was going to first of all say I never heard of actual vehicles or stuff, but they're actual, I mean, ghost ships. I've heard of that before, but I don't think I've ever heard of a ghost plane before. So that's kind of new to me.
It could have been perhaps a time warp or something from a time warp, but
time.
the plane, the Royal Air Force fighter followed the mosquito, and the mosquito actually shepherded him in, guided him back to England, and but when he landed, he couldn't find any evidence of a mosquito being airborne that night, and none of the RAF aerodromes actually had one. So it really was something from a different era and a different time that definitely helped him. There's no two ways about it.
Yeah, how interesting. How things work, huh? How about the ghost letter John Hesketh? No, Hesketh?
Yes, yeah. Again, this is a very, very touching story. And I met a lovely lady a few years ago, and she showed me the letter. But first of all, I'll tell you the story. We'll turn the clock back to the early part of the last century, and a young lad called Jonathan Hesketh. John attended his local primary school and had a very, very good friend called Annie Cresswell. These two were both 5 years old and thought the world of each other. So unusual for a little boy of 5 to have affection for a 5-year-old girl. But the feeling was quite mutual. And Annie would help him with his maths and English. And by the time these two were 16, they were absolutely inseparable. It was quite natural that they should both marry each other, which they did do, just after their 18th birthdays. They had a beautiful honeymoon on an area called the Isle of Man, an island just off the coast of Ireland called the Isle of Man. Listeners can look it up by going to Google search again, really.
Oh, yeah.
Isle of Man, beautiful place, really. On coming back from honeymoon, John was horrified to find a large letter with the words HM Government, His Majesty's Government, on the side of the letter. It was his call-up papers. Oh, no, I don't want to join the army. I don't want to fight the Germans. I haven't even seen a German. I don't want to join the army. John had no option. He was conscripted. He was sent to the army barracks to do his military training. There he was taught how to clean his Lee Enfield rifle, how to shoot the weapon, how to clean his boots, how to press his kits. And he had 1 week's leave with his beloved wife, young Annie. Every second, every minute, every hour of that leave must have meant so much to this young lad, because he knew he wasn't going to see his 19th birthday. He affectionately kissed her on the railway station and hugged her for the very, very last time. And as the train pulled out of the station, the steam and the smoke swirled down the carriages past him, and his lovely wife disappeared into the smoke. He sat down in the railway carriage, and he felt terribly upset. The only thing that helped him was that nearly every man in the carriage was going through exactly the same situation. They arrived at a horrible place called the Somme battlefield in France. And as they made their way up towards the communication trenches, the sergeant major said to each man, "Right, lads, could you just quickly write a letter to your loved ones?" John took his haversack off and quickly wrote a letter to his young wife, Annie. He then placed the letter in an envelope, and the sergeant major took each letter from each platoon member. He withdrew his bayonet and skewered all the letters, and then placed the bayonet in a sandbag at the top of the trench. At exactly 7:30 on the 1st of July 1916, these 90,000 young men down a 25-mile trench advanced towards the German lines. They were told, "Oh, don't worry, boys, this will be a piece of cake. We've been shelling the German lines for 3 days and 3 nights. There were no barbed wire left, huge gaps in the German trenches, and we'll all be in Berlin by Christmas." As it happens, the German trenches were so well dug that the British shells just bounced off them. And at the end of that terrible day, the blackest day in the history of the British Armed Forces, some 38,000 young men had been killed by 12 o'clock that day. Within 3 minutes of leaving the trench, young Johnny had been killed instantly. When word, at that period of time, his young wife, who loved her husband so much, felt there was something wrong. She always felt like a shiver down her spine. She was deeply distraught. She knew there was something wrong. And for 3 days and 3 nights, she tossed and turned and couldn't sleep. On the fourth day, a letter arrived. It hit the doormat. She saw a strange tear in the corner of the letter. She had no idea it's where the Sergeant Major's bayonet had actually pierced the letter. She opened the letter, and the words were very, very touching, written by her young husband. "Dear Annie, you are the love of my life. I worship the very ground you walk on. If I cannot come back to you in the form of a human being, I swear to you I will come back to you in the form of a ghost and say goodbye to you in the corner of the Norman Keep where we played as children." As I looked at the letter, I was deeply choked. It was very, very touching.
Yeah.
And a lot of the words had become very badly smudged. And Annie's granddaughter told me that her grandmother conceived in those 7 days, and that's why the story has continued. But the question what I said was, did your grandmother go to the Norman Keep that night? Oh, she did. Did she see him? Well, at first she didn't, but she could smell him. And apparently as human beings, we all smell different. We all have our own scent, if you will. Then he emerged, and she tried to grab him. Each time she grabbed him, her hands went straight through him. He then turned, smiled, and vaporized. Poor Annie was 18 years old. She was with child. She never ever remarried and died in 1977. All she had on her lips was the name of young Johnny Hesketh, whose only crime in life was to be born at the wrong time of the last century. My claim to fame is I used to be what's called a town councillor. I was on the local government, local town council government, and I was the deputy mayor of the town of Clitheroe. On Remembrance Sunday, of course, here in Great Britain, we all wear poppies, and we have a day of remembrance where wreaths are put on all the war memorials throughout the whole country. And because I was the deputy mayor and the mayor was ill that day, I had the job of placing the wreath on that very cenotaph, the very, very war memorial of young John Hesketh. And as I placed the wreath at the foot of the cenotaph, I glanced up and caught John's name. And of course, it meant an awful lot to me because I knew his personal story.
Unbelievable. Wow. You know what? Some of these stories can be turned into movies, that's for sure. I mean,
without a doubt. Well, again, I think really, with it being radio, you paint a picture. A picture.
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
And that's what makes radio so convincing with all these stories, really.
Yeah, and again, I mean, that's really what I love. I mean, I from the very beginning when I was a younger child, and I think my first experience was a little radio, okay, with my headphones. Well, no, did I have headphones back then? Because it was mid '80s, something. Anyways, I was listening to a Christmas special. It was like right around Christmas, and I think it was like a Christmas Carol. I do believe it was a while
Oh,
ago.
yes. Yeah.
But I turned it on. I was listening in bed, late at night, and ever since then I was just hooked. I'm like, so even now up until this day, I go to bed when we're done here. I'm going to hit the bed with my iPad, check my podcasts, and listen to some old shows. And yeah, closing the eyes, just letting the imagination go, and just painting that picture. Nothing better than that. I'm sure you agree,
Very much so, Dino, yes.
Yes. So let's move on to Lady with No Hands.
Right. Again, a very, very tragic story, this one. You could say it's alcohol related. We're going to turn the clock back to 1923 and a town in the county of Lancashire called Accrington. Living there was a lady called Maud, and Maud had a husband called William, and William was sadly killed in an ammunition factory accident. Maud was left with a young daughter called Gracie. Gracie was just 6 years old. Quite naturally, Maud had lost her husband, and she didn't want to be left on the shelf, if you will. She wanted to find another husband for security, and she had the misfortune of meeting a man called John Worley. John Worley was 7 foot tall, blue-eyed, blonde-haired, and considered to be a very good catch for any young woman.
7 foot. Wow.
So they married. Now, in those days, a lot of working class families could not afford to buy their own homes, so they lived in what's called lodging houses, or flats, or council homes, etc. They moved into a lodging house run by a very brave lady called Miss Hallgood, and she was 60 years of age, and she looked after everyone that lived in the lodging houses. Now, John Worley had a huge problem. He liked drinking alcohol, not just 1 or 2 beers, but drinking every night and getting severely inebriated. With the alcohol, he would also become quite aggressive. And Miss Horbury, who ran the lodging house, did not like seeing young girls being abused under her roof. And she had a word with Maud and said, "Look, Maud, don't worry. I can chuck him out. I know that he's been abusing you." And Maud said, "Oh, yes, I wish I'd never got married. Please throw him out." "I will do," said Miss Horbury. She packed his suitcase, and when John came down for his breakfast, she said, "There's your suitcase, you're out." "Why?" said John. "I'm not seeing women abused under my roof. You're also drinking too much, you're out." He turned round and pointed at young Gracie. "I'll get back at you through her," pointing at the little girl. He then left at great speed in a violent temper, and Maud went down to the police station and said, "My husband has threatened me and my daughter." And the police said, "Well, don't worry, we'll keep an eye on him. Whereabouts is he living now?" "He's living at a place called Claret Street in Accrington. We'll keep an eye on him." For 3 days and 3 nights, that's exactly what the local police did. They noticed he was drinking quite heavily, but making no attempt to go back to the lodging house or indeed to see his wife and stepdaughter. They decided there and then to stop the surveillance. A very, very silly mistake. On the 4th day, John Worley had a very good drink. He was quite inebriated, and he walked straight to the local primary school where he saw young Gracie playing in the playground. He walked across and grabbed her by the hand and said, "Right, we're going to go and see your mother." Now the head teacher came rushing out, Miss Westwell, and said, "Excuse me, what are you doing?" "I'm taking my daughter." You can't do that. Have you got any permission? He reached into his pocket and produced a letter which he'd forged and gave it to Miss Westwell. This afternoon, we're all going to get in the train and we're going to go to the town of Rishton. Oh, well, fair enough, said the head teacher, but I must keep this letter as proof of what's happened. A fatal mistake. Well, John Worley then took young Gracie back to the lodging house. As he opened the door, there's Miss Horbury at the door entrance. What are you doing back here? She said. All of a sudden, this 7-foot man hit Miss Horbury so hard, with one blow he broke her jaw, and her teeth spilled across the floor. She fell to the floor. Worley's not just happy with this, he repeatedly kicks her. Not just happy with this, he then got a coal shovel that was used to put coal in the fire and brought the shovel down so many times on Miss Horbury's head. He practically scalped the poor woman. Whilst this terrible act of violence is taking place, a delivery man arrives in the street and hears screaming and shouting and realizes that something very, very serious is taking place. He contacts the police station, and Accrington police send 2 constables, 2 very hardened police officers, but these 2 men were going to see a sight that they would carry to their graves. They made their way into the lodging house. As they made their way to the front room, they saw 6-year-old Gracie kneeling with both her hands removed at the wrist. PC Flegg gave immediate first aid, whilst PC Casewell made his way to the front room and saw that John Worley had tried to gas himself in the oven. He turned the gas off and pulled Worley out of the gas oven and opened the windows. At the same time, an ambulance arrived, and they saw a trail of blood from the back door, where poor Miss Horbury had managed to crawl to the back of the building. The only bones in the body that weren't broken were her left arm. She was in a terrible state. All 3 injured parties were taken to the Victoria Hospital, and they were very, very fortunate that day because a gentleman called Dr. Wheeler from the city of Manchester was on a visit to look at the hospital. He was one of the best surgeons in Great Britain for that period of time. He saved young Grace's life. He saved Miss Horbury's life. But when he came to deal with John Worley, his words were, why have you done this? Jealousy to get back at my wife. Because he was only slightly ill from the inhalation of gas, he was taken straight to the police station in Accrington and placed in a cell. In the meantime, word spread around the town that this man had attacked a 65-year-old woman and a 6-year-old girl, and this horrified the people of Accrington, and a vigilante mob set off for the police station. They broke into the police station, thrown the police officers to the side, and got to the cell, but the cell door was locked. They wanted to literally lynch John Worley for what he'd done. More police reserves arrived, and they dressed John Worley in a police officer's uniform to disguise him and got him out of the police station and straight to Preston City Jail. 5 months later, the trial began, and he was brought back to Accrington. He was brought into the Accrington courts, and there was young Gracie sitting there with no hands. And the judge, she told the judge how he'd very, very cruelly cut them off with a cutthroat knife. Miss Horbury was there as well. She was badly disfigured but alive. And the judge said, because young Grace is still alive, because Miss Horbury is still alive, I cannot try you for murder, but I'll make sure you never ever walk the streets of Accrington ever again. I sentence you to life imprisonment. Now, I do tours in that town, and I do use that story on my ghost walk. The very, very first time I used it, Dino, something very, very strange happened. As you've gathered, it's not a nice story at all. In fact, it's a horrible story, let's be honest. It really is.
I mean, terrible, yeah.
We went to number 2 Victoria Street, the lodging where it actually happened. With me that night, I had local radio, I had the Mayor of Accrington, I had the local press, and they were doing a story on the new tour in Accrington. Now, normally when I've done a tour, I just switch off. I might open a few tins of beer, put my feet up, watch television, and just unwind. But
Mm-hmm.
that night, I felt there was something very wrong. I couldn't get the story in my head really, and I climbed into bed. And my son, who was only 12 years old at the time, came rushing to the bedroom in the early hours of the morning and said, Dad, I'm having nightmares. The curtain lifted and came back. And I got out of bed and I could feel a wisp of wind in the bedroom.
Hmm.
And I just uttered the words, John Worley. Then there was silence again. My son got back into bed. The following day, I was doing a guided tour at a Sarnsby Hall, this lovely building not too far from where I live.
Hmm.
And there they have a resident medium, a chap called Gary Johnson, a brilliant guy, really. And he put his hand on my shoulder, and through his medium skills, he said, Simon, what you did with that story in Accrington is you resurrected the spirit of John Worley and you brought him back home with you. And who am I to say I didn't? But a very, very frightening story, really.
Ay, ay, ay. That's what's scary about doing a lot of what you do. Well, I mean, not too scary. I mean, what's the worst that can happen? They do reach out from time to time, these spirits, but yeah, wow.
I must say, when I did convey the story for the first time, the local press were quite horrified, and so was the mayor
Mm-hmm.
and the local radio people. But it is actually part of the history. What I can tell you is, young Grace, God bless her, she had lost both her hands,
Yeah.
but she did marry. She did marry. She had 5 grandchildren
Hmm.
and died at the age of 87. But the people of Accrington
Oh.
actually raised £15,000 for her, and through the national press,
Mm-hmm.
another £100,000 was raised as well. But she was
Wow.
known simply as the lady
With no
with
hand.
no hands.
Jeez.
It's quite an unusual story, really.
Yeah, it makes you wonder how the guy got away with, if he did anything else other than this. I mean, that's just a horrific thing to do to somebody, and
It was
for them to
alcohol.
have
I think
survived
alcohol
too.
was the real culprit, to be honest with you. Do you know?
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, no, alcohol never helps anything for sure. The ghost ride to the hospital,
Yeah,
1963.
yeah. Now this is an intriguing story,
Sounds it.
which came from the county of Cumbria, and a gentleman called John Burroughs. John Burroughs lived in a different state, different county,
Hmm.
and he would go and see his mum once a month. He would drive a good 300 miles to go and see his mum. And on a beautiful August evening in 1963, I think it was, he was driving down a lane, a country road really, that would take him to the town of Kendal.
Hmm.
As he came round a bend, he saw a young girl on the road verge wearing a white dress with a blue, almost like a blue sweater, if you will, a blue jumper. But one half of the white dress was saturated in blood. So John could see her from a distance away and slowed the car down, wound the window down, and shouted, Are you okay? He said, No, no, no. I've just been knocked over. Please take me to the hospital. Okay, get in. So he opened the door, and this girl hobbled in and sat next to him. And he put the seatbelt on her and then drove at great speed towards the hospital. As he got to the hospital, he reversed into the parking lot. But before he'd finished parking, this young girl had unclipped her seatbelt and opened the door and hobbled across the courtyard and up the steps into the casualty department. John Burroughs parked the vehicle and rushed into the casualty department to see how she was. And when he got there was a nurse at the desk, and he said, How is she? How is she? I just brought this young girl and she's been badly injured. What do you mean, badly injured? This young girl, I just brought her in. No, you haven't. There's no one here. All the cubicles are empty. But I just brought this young girl in, he said. She was badly injured. I just brought her in. my car, it's got blood on the seat. I just brought this young girl in. At the same time, a police car arrived in the courtyard, and two officers walked up to John Burroughs, who was outside the casualty building, smoking a cigarette quite ferociously. And the officer said, "Excuse me, do you realise you've just gone through two red lights?" "Well, I do, officer, but I had this young girl. She'd been badly injured. I brought her here to the hospital. Uh, you should see my car. There's blood all over the front seat." The officers walked to the car. There was no blood at all to be seen in the car. John shouted, "There's a girl. I brought this girl in. She's in the casualty department." The officers went to the casualty department along with a nurse. They searched all the cubicles, and a doctor arrived and said, "What's the commotion about?" And John said, "I brought this young girl in. She was badly injured." And the doctor said, "Are you some kind of nutcase?" "No, no, I brought a young girl in, I swear to you." The doctor looked quite annoyed and quite concerned and said, "Well, sit down." He then reached into his desk and brought out a newspaper that was exactly 1 year old and put the newspaper on top of the desk. John looked at the front page of the newspaper and saw the same young girl he had brought in that night. The doctor explained, "A year ago tonight, this young girl was brought into the casualty department. She'd been knocked over by a car, and we fought for 6 hours to try and save her. And you come in and said you brought a young girl in." John said, "Excuse me, doctor, it was her. It was definitely her." The doctor looked very aggressive towards him and thought, well, he looks like he's telling the truth. But John realised he'd actually picked up a ghost that night from the area where she'd been knocked down exactly 12 months before. A story that he never, ever forgot.
Wow. You get a lot of these stories like this within hospitals, even here in the U.S. too, of stuff like that. Just interesting stories.
Hospitals, yeah, they're very traumatic places, though, aren't they?
Oh,
very traumatic.
Mm-hmm. Let's move on to Skipton Fireman's story.
Yeah. Again, when I conduct a tour, I do like to meet local people, and I contact them sometimes, and sometimes they contact me. Skipton is a town in Yorkshire. It's a beautiful tourism town. It's got a castle there, but this story is very, very much a story from the other side. I met this fireman, and he was a smashing guy called John, and he had a very, very good friend, the name of Brian. And of course, firemen, they have a very dangerous job. And John said to Brian, "Look, if anything happens to my kids, do you promise you'll look after them?" And Brian said, "Yes, I do, but do you promise to look after my little lad? If anything happens to me, of course I will." Now, fire engines go to awesome places, and of course, these lads would put their lives on the line on a few occasions. However, John was going to lose his life, but not as a result of his work. He had a very, very powerful Japanese motorbike called a Kawasaki. Very, very powerful bike. And on his days off, he would climb on his motorbike and really use the local highways to get a bit of speed up, etc. However, one day he'd come off the main highway and was making his way back to his home in Skipton. He had no idea that a mile away, a vehicle with scaffolding poles had just by accident dropped 3 scaffolding poles off the side of the vehicle by mistake, and they were lying across the road. John came round the corner at about 80 miles an hour and caught one of the scaffolding poles and was catapulted off his bike, where he broke his neck. That afternoon, his mate, Brian, his pal Brian, received a telephone call from John's wife, informing him that his best friend John had been killed. Brian was deeply upset and remembered that he'd promised to look after the little boy. And he said to John's wife, "Look, have you told the little lad Jason yet?" No, I can't bear to tell him." "Could he come over, please, right away?" she said. So Brian made his way straight to John's home. Outside the house was a police car, and as he went into the front room, he saw John's wife being comforted by a female police officer. And he said, where's Jason? Oh, he's upstairs. He's upstairs. So John walked upstairs and saw the little boy Jason, who was only 6 years old, playing on what's called a PlayStation, a games console, if you will.
Oh, yeah.
And he walked over and sat next to him and put his arm around Jason, as he had done on many occasions. He was a good friend, really. And he said, Jason, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I've got some very, very sad news to tell you about your dad. I'm so sorry. I have to tell you this right now. Oh, it's okay, Brian. Don't worry. It's okay. My dad's just been to visit me. He's told me all about what's happened, and he's told me I've got to look after Mum. And that is a very true story.
And sad. Like
Deeply
most of them.
sad.
Yeah.
Deeply sad.
I cannot believe that we're almost getting ready to come up on 2 hours there. Wow. The stories. And we still got quite a few stories to go. So here, let me get another one in here. Plug drawing riots of 1843.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Sounds interesting.
That's a great story, Dino. A great story, yeah.
Yeah, let's go for that one.
We'll turn the clock back to 1842. Now, I keep mentioning textiles. Up in the north of England, at one time, Great Britain used to clothe the world. And the textile workers used to say, let's clothe Great Britain before breakfast and the rest of the world afterwards.
Yes.
And that's exactly what they did do. Of course, all the cotton had to come from the southern United States, all the Louisiana, Mississippi cotton. And then it was turned into really good quality clothing, etc. Yeah. But the textile workers in Blackburn, Lancashire, they didn't have it easy, really. The wages weren't very, very good. The hours were very, very long. And in the year 1842, a lot of the factories were having what's called brand new steam-driven equipment installed. As a result, they didn't need as many workers. And to add to this problem, there was a world recession in textiles. 5 local lads met in a public house in Blackburn called the Unicorn Inn. Mr. Ratcliffe Ingham, Mr. Joseph Rawlinson, William Hartley, Ratcliffe Ingham, and Robert Proctor. And they came across this amazing plan. They said, look, lads, we need to get every single textile worker out on strike. We also need to visit every factory and pull the plugs out of the boilers and extinguish the flames and stop all production and demand better pay and better conditions.
Yep.
These 5 young men had no idea that one person had been hiding at the back of the Unicorn and listened to every word they said. He left at great speed, ran down the street and went straight to the police commissioner's house. Police Commissioner Shepherd, and told Shepherd all about what was going to happen the following day at 3:30, when our 5 men would break into Rogerton Brearley's textile mill and pull the plugs out. The commissioner thought, right, I need some more help, and he contacted the local magistrate, Mr. John Hindle, and John Hindle galloped at great speed on his white horse to the city of Preston to alert the army. In Preston was a regiment from Scotland called the Black Watch, Highland soldiers from Scotland, very tough men. At exactly 3:30 on the 18th of August, 1842, our 5 local men started their operation. They went straight to Roget and Brearley's textile mill, rushed into the main yard, went to the boiler house and pulled the plug out of the boiler. The flames were extinguished and production stopped. And they were greeted by huge applause and clapping from the textile workers who joined them. Then they went to the next factory and pulled the plugs out. And then they were joined by that factory. As they made their way down towards the next factory, they saw a thin red line of Scottish infantry, the famous Black Watch Regiment. In front of the Scottish infantry, who all had loaded muskets and bayonets fixed, was Mr. Hindle on the white horse. He shouted the words, "Our sovereign lady the Queen chargeth and commandeth that persons assembled are to disperse peaceably to their habitats and lawful businesses. Failure to comply with this order, resulting in tumultuous and righteous behaviour, would have accordingly, God save the Queen. As the words Queen left his mouth, the Scottish infantry opened fire, killing 37 people instantly. Our 5 local men rushed forward. Ratcliffe Ingham jumped up and grabbed the magistrate from his white horse and gave him a severe hiding on the side of the road. William Proctor disarmed a Scottish soldier by taking the musket off him and turning the weapon round and shouting the words, "You fire that musket and I'll run you through. You take my life, I'll take yours too. A fair day's pay for a fair day's work," before he too was pummeled to the floor. At the end of that terrible day, some 64 people had been shot dead by the army, and our 5 local men had been rounded up, and the following morning were brought in front of the magistrates. Ingham shouted to the judge, "Sir, I've got a wife and 6 children waiting for me, sir. You should have thought about that before you took up arms against the Queen's soldiers. We, the courts here in Blackburn, find the 5 of you guilty of righteous behaviour. The death penalty will be installed immediately." Our 5 local lads showed no emotion whatsoever, and this seemed to concern the judges. They thought, right, let's commute the death penalty. We'll have the 5 of you sent straight to Australia to serve your sentence in Australia. Our 5 local lads arrived in a place called Brisbane, Australia, where they were worked to death. They never saw their native country ever again. The people of Blackburn, of course, well, they were horrified what had happened, but the textile barons who owned those factories made sure that all the damage was repaired and paid for from the wages of all their staff. They never ever had it easy. However, one country recognised these people more than anyone else. There was none other than the United States of America. They knew that the British tackler, when I say tackler, on the shop floor in the textile factories were highly skilled people called tacklers. And these men and women knew exactly how to work what's called the Lancashire loom weaving machine. A good tackler could keep 6 going at the same time, and if they broke down, repair them very, very quickly, but also thread the thousands and thousands of lines of cotton through the thousands of eyes very, very quickly. They were quicker than any of their foreign counterparts. In Boston, Massachusetts, is a place called Spindle River. A huge, huge area which this very day still produces good quality textiles. They knew if they could get the British tacklers to work for them, they would indeed take over the world's markets with textiles. So therefore, in the year 1902, a delegation arrived from Boston, and they went to Accrington, Blackburn, Burnley, Nelson, Cone, Entwistle, and Manchester. And they waited outside the factories for the tacklers to leave, and they'd shout, "Excuse me, gentlemen, we can offer you 5 times as much you're earning here in England. We'll pay for your trip across the Atlantic Ocean. We'll give you Saturday and Sunday off and a 40-hour-a-week guaranteed hours of work with Saturday and Sunday off each week." And thousands left Lancashire and made their way to Spindle City in Massachusetts. And I'm told this very, very day, if you were to get a telephone book from that area, every second name is a Lancastrian name from the Red Rose County of Lancashire.
And that was what year?
1902.
Okay.
1902.
Okay, wow. Because, I was going to say, early on in the last century, because it's already 2017, things were child labor laws. There were no labor laws. A lot of these mills and factories and all that kind of stuff. The children would do the work.
Oh, yes, it happened here in England. What did happen on quite a few occasions is the mill owners were very greedy people. They became very, very wealthy.
Oh, yeah.
And what a few of them would do is use orphans, children that had no mother and father.
Yeah.
And these poor kids would have to crawl under rotating equipment,
Mm-hmm.
textile looms, to bring back the spent cotton that had fallen to the floor so it could be used again and
Yes.
refed into the Lancashire looms. Many a young child, their clothing would get caught up in the spinning equipment, and many a child lost their lives in
Yes.
these mills. And of course, with them being orphans, there's no parents to answer to. You could see the mill owners actually bought the children. It was very, very cruel,
Oh yeah.
and
Yeah.
all in the name of making money, really.
Oh yeah, that's how the world worked back then until the laws came into effect. I mean, we have stories over here similar to that with children in some textile mills where the children would do exactly what you said and many lost their lives for money going into the pocket of the rich. So yep, that's
Very
just
much so.
yeah. Boy, we are coming up on here. I don't know how long your telephone is. Is that a long one? You think you can get that in or no?
Yeah, I'll be very, very quick. I'll be very, very quick.
Okay.
Um, this is called the Teleghost, and we'll go to Blackburn, Lancashire, and this very, very day, way back in the year 1907, stood a beautiful theatre called Trevanian's Amphitheatre.
Hmm.
Some very, very famous people had performed there, like Charlie Chaplin, Ted Ray, Tessie O'Shea,
Yes.
and it was a great theatre. In the 1930s, it was renamed the Grand Cinema. In 1957, it was bought by a chap called William John Murray, and he loved the old theatre and tried to get the old theatre back up and running. But he was competing against a brand new piece of kit called the television. Sadly, in 1959, he put on the last show, which was called A Farewell to Blackburn. As the curtains closed the last time, he made his way to the green room, sat down, and reached for a revolver and shot himself through the cranium. He dropped to the floor as dead as a doornail. For 3 long years, the old theatre was left empty. Vagrants broke in. There were stories of fires and the odd ghostly story that came from there as well. In 1962, the General Post Office bought the building to knock it down, which they did do, and they built a telephone exchange building on the very, very site. The building was spanking brand new. The very, very first night shift arrived, which consisted of 3 gentlemen: Jeff Greer, Bert Hutchinson, and indeed Tom Cotton. And these guys would work in the top floor as night-time switchboard operators. As the calls came in, they would divert them by jack plugs. And around 3 in the morning, Jeff said to his 2 mates, "The calls are dying down now, boys. I'll go and make a cup of tea." He had a large tray and made his way to the end of the building. Now, Jeff used to wear a heavy brogue shoe with a metal heel plate and a metal toe plate, and as he walked, you'd hear the sound of his footsteps. He stopped at the end of the top floor. His 2 friends could see him through plate glass windows towards the cafeteria area, and they saw that he was standing still but pouring boiling water into the kettle. But they could still hear his footsteps. As Jeff made the tea, he felt he was being watched. He came back with a tea and a tray with 3 cups, 3 cups, some sugar and some milk, and said, "What's wrong, lads?" "Well, Jeff, we saw you standing still, but we still heard your footsteps. That's strange. As I made the tea, I felt I was being watched." All of a sudden, all the blinds on the top floor came up and came down again, and they all heard the sound of a grand piano playing the Blue Danube song. They searched all 7 floors. The sound of the grand piano didn't get any louder or didn't get any quieter, and they searched all 7 floors but could not find the grand piano. This went on not every single night, but strange things happened at least once a week. But Christmas 1968 was definitely the most frightening time for our 3 nighttime switchboard operators. They clocked in for Christmas Eve for their night shift, but this time they heard laughing from downstairs, and the lift also worked by itself. Jeff, being a bit more braver than Tom and Bert, waited for the lift doors to open to pounce on his victim. The doors opened. There was no one there at all, but they still heard the laughing from downstairs. The three of them climbed into the lift and went down to the bottom floor. As the lift doors opened, they saw the Christmas tree shaking wildly by itself. All the baubles fell off the Christmas tree without a single bauble breaking. The tree then bent back and went, and then it stood still once again. Now, the people of Blackburn call this ghost the Teleghost, after the Telephone Exchange building. Who is the Teleghost? None other than Mr. William J. Murray, who loved that building so much he couldn't bear to leave it. And there we have the Teleghost, Dino.
Wow, the Teleghost. I love it. I love it. That's awesome. Yeah, so we still got stories left over for next time down the road here.
Sure, Dino, sure. What would be really nice would be to come up to Ohio to see you personally and have a really good chat.
Oh, that would be awesome.
Perhaps we could also find some other good ghost storytellers and have an Ohio Ghost Week convention or something.
You know what? That sounds perfect. I would love to get something like that together. If at all possible, I will get in contact with you for sure.
Yeah,
I would love
sounds great, really. We need to walk the boards and bring the old stories together, but from a theatre, a theatre with a good audience, and we can turn the lights down, and I'm sure you could bring some of the best ghost storytellers in the world together and have a really good event.
For sure. This area is really big in Cleveland, Ohio here. We got a very, very well-known playhouse district. So I think getting that filled and listening to a night of ghost. I don't think I've ever heard any around here. So, we need to do it.
It's quite unique, isn't it, really?
It is.
PITN is a great show. And I know there's many people listening right now. Perhaps we could hear from them. It'd be great, really.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, like I said, anybody listening right now, Simon Entwistle, get that name in your head, okay? And the last name is spelled Entwistle, Simon Entwistle. Go to there and go to Top Hat Tours. Boy, and feel free to always, I am always checking your stuff. I'll share your stuff onto my page anytime I see something really cool.
Thank you, Dino. Thank you very much indeed for that. Greatly appreciate it.
For sure. And like I said, Amazon.com has his book, Ghostly Tales of the Unexpected. And just hit the link. Go ahead, buy it, download it, Kindle, whatever. And you won't be disappointed, man. This guy's filled with ghost stories. He lives it. This is what I love. He lives it. So, again, Simon, I appreciate it so much. I know you need to get some rest. So, I will let you go. And I appreciate it, my friend. Until next time.
Thank you, Dino. It's been a great pleasure to talk to you as always. And thanks for kindly having me. Greatly appreciate it.
Thank you. And as always, until next time, I appreciate it. And you take care, okay?
Thank you, Dino. Same to you.
Good night, Simon.
Good night.
There you go. There we have it. Simon Entwistle. Be sure to get the name down. Simon Entwistle. Boy, yeah, hopefully next time. He's probably filled, with ghost stories. So, yeah, I mean, what are you going to do? There's tons and tons and tons. But, yeah, what can I say? Be sure to subscribe. This will be up on iTunes probably no later than tomorrow. So look on iTunes, Google Play Store, give a search for Paranormal Into the Night. Paranormal Into the Night. And subscribe and you'll never miss a show. I plan on doing more and more. Something's going to be done here relatively soon, I think. And you guys will be pleasantly pleased. So that's as much as I'll say about it. I see Ronald Murphy there. I hope he's listening. I'm on Facebook right now. I see him. If you are, buddy, Ronald Murphy, awesome. Go back to my last show with him, talking vampires and werewolves. Just look up Ronald Murphy. And he was an awesome guest, too. What can I say? Hunters of the Unknown. Another great show. My past 3 shows have been off the hook. I've just loved them big time. So, so subscribe to everything, Facebook, YouTube, join the groups. Please interact. If you know somebody who wants to be on the show, shoot me a message. Like I said, in Paranormal Into the Night, you could do that anywhere. So I'd like to also throw a shout out to Leonard O'Neill and Omar for their help. Leonard got his group Ancient Aliens Worldwide. Remember that. It's the largest Ancient Aliens group out there. And they're doing some good stuff over there with some good shows. A lot of good guests going on right now. And Omar takes care of all of that stuff there. He's the other group is Watchers Talk. So go click, the join and like and all that other stuff. And same with mine. And other than that, man, I'm going to leave it go, the show, until next time, really. Peace out. Love to you all. And stay spooky and all that other good stuff. And we will see what we have next time, huh? So good night, everybody.